A leather beak and glass eyes stare from the depths of history. This is the Plague Doctor, an icon of medieval horror that has seeped into our modern nightmares. But the haunting mask we all recognize hides a profound historical mystery. Where did this terrifying costume truly come from? By the end of this investigation, you will uncover the tangled origins of one of history's most misunderstood symbols. We will sift through centuries of myth and medicine, asking if the mask was a brilliant medical device, a piece of psychological theater, or something else entirely. What does this eerie figure reveal about our timeless fear of the invisible? The year was 1347 when death arrived by sea. Ships drifted into the Sicilian port of Messina, carrying not just goods, but a horror that would reshape the world. Within days, sailors and dockworkers began to die in agony, their bodies marked by dark, oozing swellings. This was the Black Death, and it moved across Europe with a speed and ferocity that defied comprehension. Within 5 years, it is estimated that between 75 and 200 million people perished. Entire villages were wiped from the map. The social order crumbled as priests, doctors, and officials fled or died alongside the common people. It was a catastrophe of such magnitude that it shattered the medieval mind. In the face of this invisible slaughter, the theories of disease held by even the most learned men were utterly powerless. Their leading explanation was not germs or contagion, but miasma. This was the belief that sickness was carried in foul, corrupted air. The stench of rotting garbage, the damp vapors from swamps, the very breath of the sick, these were all thought to be poisonous. You can see how this made terrifying sense to them. Where the plague struck hardest, the air was indeed thick with the smell of death. So the logical defense was to avoid the bad air, or to purify it with strong perfumes and smoke. But someone had to enter those plague-stricken houses. Someone had to tend to the dying, to tally the dead. This desperate, impossible need created a vacuum, a role so dangerous that few would dare fill it. And it is directly from this nightmare landscape of miasma and despair that the figure of the Plague Doctor would eventually emerge, not as a medieval invention, but as a later answer to a fear born in this very century. From this chaos, a specific profession was forged. The Plague Doctor was not a knight in shining armor, but a civil servant of the apocalypse. Towns and cities, desperate to maintain some semblance of order, would hire these men. They were often not the elite physicians of their day. Instead, they might be young doctors just starting out, older practitioners whose careers had stalled, or even individuals with no formal medical training at all, willing to take the terrible risk for a steady wage. Their contract was a grim bargain, exchanging their safety for a salary. Once hired, they became walking symbols of the town's crisis. Their primary duty was not necessarily to cure, for true cures did not exist. Their job was to manage the plague's logistics. They were required to visit every infected house, a task that made them pariahs. Inside those suffocating rooms, they would attempt treatments dictated by the flawed science of the time, perhaps applying poultices to the painful buboes or prescribing purges and bloodletting, actions we now know were more likely to hasten death than prevent it. But perhaps their most crucial function was as a morbid record keeper. They tallied the dead, providing city officials with the terrible numbers that charted the epidemic's course. This made them a walking contradiction, a figure of both hope and dread. To the sick, they represented a slender thread of aid. To everyone else, their appearance in a neighborhood was a death sentence, a sign that the invisible killer had arrived next door. They lived in enforced isolation, often forbidden from social contact, and were paid through windows to avoid direct interaction. They were not revered as heroes, but feared as living omens, men who carried the scent of death with them wherever they walked. Their uniform was a suit of armor designed for a war against air itself. To understand the mask, we must first see the entire costume, a head-to-toe barrier born from desperation and theory. The foundation was a long, heavy gown, typically made of waxed leather or densely woven linen soaked in wax or suet. From neck to ankle, it was meant to be impermeable. The practical purpose was grimly straightforward: to shield the doctor from the bodily fluids of the sick, from sputum, blood, and pus. But in the logic of miasma theory, this wax shell served a higher purpose. It was thought to repel the poisonous air itself, creating a personal pocket of safe atmosphere. Over their hands went sturdy leather gloves, on their head a wide-brimmed hat, often made of the same treated leather. This hat was not merely for shade or rain, it was a professional badge, a symbol of their grim office that made them instantly recognizable, and more importantly, it was believed to help keep the foul air away from their head and hair. And then there was the cane. Every plague doctor carried a long wooden stick. This was not for walking support, but for examination at a distance. They would use it to lift the bedding of a patient, to point, or to gently position someone without the risk of direct contact. It was a tool of terrifying detachment, a physical manifestation of the barrier between the healthy and the condemned. Each piece of this ensemble, from the waxed coat to the wooden cane, was a layer of separation, a desperate attempt to create a mobile, sterile bubble in a world believed to be saturated with death. And at the very center of this protective shell, guarding the most vulnerable point of entry, was the mask. At the heart of this protective suit was its most famous and fearsome component, the mask itself. Picture a face crafted from fine, supple leather, molded to fit closely. Where the eyes should be, two round, thick lenses of glass were set, like the windows of a diving bell, offering a distorted view of the suffering world outside. But the defining feature, the element that transformed this from a simple face covering into an icon of terror, was the long, curved beak. It protruded a full half-foot or more, giving the wearer the profile of some giant, malevolent bird. The materials were deliberate. Leather was durable, could be molded when wet, and formed a barrier. Glass was the clearest material available to protect the eyes, a critical weak point. But the beak's shape is the true mystery. Its design was not an accident of fashion. It served a very specific purpose, according to the medical beliefs of the era. The common explanation, the one repeated in countless books and documentaries, is that this hollow beak was a primitive filter. It would be stuffed with a mixture of aromatic herbs and flowers, things like dried roses, cloves, mint, myrrh, or sponges soaked in strong vinegar. The idea was that as the doctor breathed in, the air would be forced through this fragrant stuffing, thereby purifying the poisonous miasma before it reached his lungs. On the surface, this makes perfect sense. It is a direct, physical application of the miasma theory, a wearable air freshener for a world that smelled of decay. This explanation is so logical, so neatly tied to the historical context, that it has become accepted fact. But the origin of this very mask, and whether its primary inventor truly intended it as a herbal filter, is where our solid ground begins to soften and the deeper mystery starts. This fragrant stuffing was known as a pomander, a portable garden of scents carried into the heart of decay. The logic was rooted in the very bedrock of pre-modern medicine, the idea that opposites could cure. If disease was carried by foul, putrid air, then the solution must be to introduce sweet, clean, and powerfully aromatic air. The plague doctor's beak became a kind of walking censer, a personal device to transform poison into perfume. Historical records and later medical texts provide us with specific recipes for this desperate air filter. One common mixture included dried roses, to provide a floral sweetness, cloves for their sharp, penetrating aroma, mint for its crisp freshness, myrrh for its rich, resinous scent, and even simple straw to give the whole mass structure. Sometimes these materials were ground and mixed, other times they were layered like a sandwich, or sponges soaked in strong vinegar or medicinal wines were inserted into the beak's tip. Each breath the doctor took would, in theory, pull air through this botanical barrier, stripping it of its deadly properties before it reached his lungs. It was a physical manifestation of hope, a belief that the power of a rose could stand against the stench of death. Yet this compelling theory immediately raises practical questions. How often were these complex mixtures actually used? Fresh, high-quality herbs and spices like cloves and myrrh were incredibly expensive commodities in 17th century Europe, not something a town council would casually purchase in bulk for a hired physician. Would they have been replenished daily, or did that beak slowly become just an empty leather tube, a hollow symbol of a forgotten theory? And even if used perfectly, we now know that no amount of lavender or mint could stop a bacterial pathogen like Yersinia pestis. The aromatic theory, while beautifully symbolic of the era's thinking, may have been more about psychological comfort for the doctor and a visible performance of science for the terrified public than a genuinely believed medical solution. So if the herbal filter was perhaps more ideal than reality, where did this iconic beak mask design actually come from? Its origins point not to the plague-ridden streets of medieval Europe, but to the mind of one specific man in a much later century. The most haunting question is not what the beak held, but whether it held anything at all. Think about the practical reality. A plague doctor is moving through cramped, chaotic homes, bending over beds, perhaps even fleeing from an angry or delirious patient. With every turn of the head, every jostle, what would keep that delicate mixture of dried petals and powdered spices from simply tumbling out the end of the beak? There was no filter mesh, no secure compartment. Even if packed tightly, the materials would settle and shift, and then there is the issue of breath itself. To draw air through a dense plug of straw and herbs would require significant effort, like trying to breathe through a thick pillow. In the heat and stress of the work, under the heavy waxed robe, would a doctor not instinctively begin to breathe around the sides of the beak, rendering the whole apparatus pointless? This leads to the question of maintenance. In the overwhelming crush of an active outbreak, with dozens of calls each day, who had the time or resources to meticulously repack that beak with fresh, expensive aromatics? Cloves and myrrh were luxury items, shipped from distant lands. It seems unlikely a frugal city council would fund a daily supply. The herbal filter begins to look less like standard equipment and more like a ceremonial ideal, perhaps used for an official visit or a public demonstration, but possibly abandoned in the grueling daily grind. This suspicion grows when we look for visual evidence. If this mask was the standard gear of plague doctors for centuries, we would expect to find it everywhere in the art and broadsheets of the time. Yet detailed, contemporary illustrations of doctors actually wearing the full beaked costume during the Black Death, or even the later plagues of the 16th and 17th centuries, are strikingly rare. Most period images show doctors in long gowns and hats, sometimes with cloth over their faces, but not with the distinctive leather beak. This visual silence is deafening. It suggests the iconic costume we know today might not have been the widespread, everyday uniform we assume. The elegant theory of the aromatic filter fits our modern desire for a logical explanation, a clear purpose for that bizarre beak. But history is often messier than our stories. What if the explanation we've accepted for so long is actually a later invention, a tidy story applied backwards to make sense of a strange artifact? To find the mask's true origin, we must follow the trail to a single, brilliant, and eccentric man. The trail leads us to a single, meticulously crafted piece of paper from the year 1656. In the workshop of German printmaker Paulus Fuest, an engraving was produced that would forever freeze the plague doctor in time. Its title translates to Dr. Beak of Rome, and it is arguably the most important piece of evidence in this entire mystery. For the first time, we see the complete iconic costume rendered in stunning, chilling detail. The figure stands tall, draped in the long, dark, waxed coat. One hand holds the diagnostic cane, the other what appears to be an incense burner, perhaps to further purify the air. The wide-brimmed hat crowns the ensemble. And of course, there is the mask, the long, curved beak protruding like a bird of prey, the glass lenses glinting blankly. This image is so complete, so definitive, that it feels like a photograph from the front lines of a plague outbreak. But we must look closer, beyond the costume, to the context. The engraving is not a medical textbook illustration or a public health notice. It is a satire, a piece of pointed commentary. The text that accompanies it mocks the doctor as a figure of greed and quackery, suggesting he profits from the fear of the rich while leaving the poor to die. He is not portrayed as a heroic healer, but as a sinister opportunist, a vulture in human form. This changes everything. The most famous early depiction of the plague doctor is not a documentary record, it is a caricature. It tells us less about what plague doctors actually wore, and more about what people feared and distrusted about them. Yet this satirical image, created during a later wave of plague in the 17th century, has been plucked from its original context and projected backwards through time. It has become the default visual shorthand for all plague doctors, across all centuries. Our modern Halloween costumes, our video game villains, our collective nightmare of the figure, they all flow directly from Fouist's engraving. A single artist's interpretation, born from mockery and social criticism, has cemented itself in history as fact. So if this was a satirical exaggeration, what did real plague doctors wear? The search for an actual inventor of the beaked mask takes us to an even more fascinating and unlikely figure. The search for the mask's true origin requires us to look before Paulus Fouist's famous satire. If we sift through the visual record of earlier plagues, a surprising picture emerges. Consider an engraving from Rome, dated 1619, nearly 4 decades before Dr. Beak. It shows a plague physician, but his face is not covered by a long leather beak. Instead, he wears what looks like a cloth wrapped around his head and face, with a pair of spectacles perched precariously over it. In other images from the 16th and 17th centuries, doctors are shown with various forms of protection, sometimes just a scarf, sometimes a more structured cloth mask, occasionally with a short, stubby protrusion, but rarely the dramatic, curved beak we know today. These are not the uniform of a universal profession, but improvised, regional attempts at defense. They suggest that the idea of covering the face was widespread, but the execution was anything but standardized. The terrifying bird-like visage was not a constant across 300 years of plague. It was a specific design that crystallized at a particular moment. This visual patchwork complicates the story immensely. It means the iconic plague Dr. Mask was not born in the Black Death of the 1300s. It was not even standard during the Great Plagues of the 1600s. So when, and why, did this singular, haunting design finally lock into place? The answer lies not in the chaos of a plague street, but in the mind of a man who saw the problem from an entirely different angle. To find the mask's deeper roots, we must step far beyond the plague years. Long before the Black Death, cultures across the world saw the bird not as a symbol of pestilence, but of protection and transcendence. In ancient Egypt, priests serving the sun god Ra would sometimes wear masks depicting the falcon-headed deity Horus. This was not for medical purposes, but for ritual. The bird mask transformed the wearer, allowing them to channel divine power, to see with the sharp eyes of a celestial hunter, and to act as an intermediary between the earthly and the spiritual realms. Similarly, in shamanic traditions from Siberia to the Americas, bird masks were tools for spiritual journeys. A shaman might wear the likeness of an eagle or a raven to fly into other worlds, to seek healing knowledge, or to ward off malevolent spirits. The beak was a conduit, a symbol of breath, voice, and connection to the unseen. Meanwhile, in the more practical world of ancient Roman medicine, a different kind of protection was noted. The great physician Galen, while treating gladiators, understood the concept of wound contamination. He and his contemporaries would sometimes use a piece of cloth, a mappa, to cover their mouths and noses when dealing with foul odors or infections. This was a rudimentary barrier, a simple layer of linen against the perceived dangers of corrupted air. So we have two powerful, ancient threads. One is symbolic, the bird mask as a vessel for spiritual authority and a shield against invisible forces. The other is practical, the cloth barrier as a basic defense against miasma. Now, consider the Europe of the 17th century, a place where ancient knowledge, both practical and symbolic, still lingered in the collective memory, often filtered through a deeply superstitious and religious lens. Is it possible that the plague doctor's costume is a strange, Gothic hybrid of these two ideas? The long leather gown and gloves are the practical Roman impulse, the barrier made more sophisticated. But the beak, that terrifying, exaggerated beak, feels different. It goes far beyond a simple filter. It transforms the human face into something otherworldly, something between a tool and a totem. It could be a macabre fusion, taking the ancient spiritual authority of the bird mask, the idea of wearing a powerful, non-human identity to confront death, and welding it to the medieval understanding of miasma. The plague doctor, then, becomes more than a medical practitioner. He becomes a kind of anti-shaman, a ritual figure for a society gripped by terror. His mask does not help him fly to the gods, It marks him as one who walks among the dying. It is both a psychological armor for the wearer and a terrifying signal to the community, a symbol that the person beneath the leather and glass is no longer entirely human, but a dedicated instrument of a desperate civic order. This fusion of ancient symbolism and grim practicality might explain why the image has such enduring power. It taps into something primal in our psyche, the age-old instinct to don a mask, to become something else, when facing forces too great to confront with a naked face. But what if the inspiration for that beak came not from a bird, but from a building? Look up at the skyline of a medieval cathedral, and you will see them, stone sentinels frozen in perpetual grimace. Gargoyles, their function was brutally practical, to serve as ornate waterspouts, channeling rainwater away from the delicate masonry walls to prevent erosion. But their form was often fantastical, monstrous, and yes, frequently featuring long, exaggerated noses or beaks that projected from the building's face. These architectural features were a constant presence in the European landscape, a familiar sight in every major town and city. They were part of the visual language of the era, symbols of a world where the practical and the spiritual, the functional and the monstrous, were intricately woven together. Now, consider the plague doctor's mask again. Its long, hollow, downward curving beak is strikingly similar in form to these stone water channels. Both are protrusions designed to direct a flow away from a protected core. The gargoyle channels destructive rainwater away from the sacred church walls. The mask, in the logic of miasma theory, was meant to channel destructive air away from the doctor's sacred breath. This is a fascinating, if speculative, parallel. Could the mask's designer have unconsciously drawn from this ubiquitous architectural form? The idea of a protruding nose or beak as a device for diverting a harmful element was literally carved into the cityscape. When faced with the problem of defending against a flood of bad air, the mind might naturally reach for a shape already associated with protection through diversion. It transforms the mask from a purely medical device into a kind of portable, personal architecture. The doctor becomes a walking cathedral, his waxed robe the walls, his beaked mask the gargoyle, tasked with channeling away the poisonous flood of miasma that threatened to erode the very fabric of life. This theory suggests the mask's power may come from a deep, cultural resonance, a form that felt instinctively right because it echoed a form already trusted to keep the unseen dangers of the world at bay. The most crucial evidence lies not in art, but in ink. To understand what plague doctors were officially instructed to wear, we must turn to the medical manuals of the time. Our most important guide is a man named Charles Delorme, a French physician who served not in the filthy streets, but in the gilded halls of royalty. He was the personal doctor to King Louis XIII and later to the powerful Cardinal Richelieu. In the 1600s, Delorme wrote a detailed treatise on how to treat plague, and within it, he gives us a clear description of a protective costume. He advises the physician to wear a long coat made of Moroccan leather or smooth waxed cloth from neck to ankle. He mentions gloves, boots, and a hat. And for the face, he prescribes a mask with glass openings for the eyes and a nose, quote, half a foot long, shaped like a beak, filled with perfume. Here, at last, seems to be the smoking gun, the definitive text that confirms the iconic beaked mask as standard medical equipment, but we must read Delorme with a historian's caution. He was writing from a position of immense privilege, describing an ideal, perhaps even theoretical, outfit. This was not a manual for the common, town-hired plague doctor, but a recommendation from a royal physician who could afford the finest Moroccan leather and the most expensive perfumes. His description is the concept of perfect protection, the gold standard. It tells us what the most elite medical minds of the 17th century believed should be worn, not necessarily what was worn by the average practitioner in Marseille or London. Furthermore, when we search other medical texts and municipal records from the same period, the specific, detailed description of the beaked mask becomes remarkably scarce. Many manuals stress the importance of covering the face with cloth or sponges soaked in vinegar, but they do not consistently mention that distinctive long, curved leather beak. This creates a fascinating disconnect. The powerful, lasting image comes from a satirical engraving, and the clearest textual description comes from a royal physician's ideal. Meanwhile, the gritty, day-to-day reality recorded in town council minutes and the diaries of practicing doctors is often far less specific and far less uniform. It suggests that the plague doctor's uniform, especially the mask, was not a single, universally adopted invention. It was an idea that evolved, a concept that varied from city to city and from budget to budget. Some doctors may have worn a version of Delorme's ideal. Many more probably made do with a waxed coat and a simple cloth tied over their face. The iconic beaked mask, then, stands at the intersection of medical theory, elite recommendation, and popular imagination. It was a powerful idea that, through art and later retrospection, hardened into the symbol we know today, often overshadowing the messier, more varied reality of history. While doctors debated miasma in the sick room, another group of men were conducting their own war against invisible vapors in a very different setting, the alchemist's laboratory. These were the proto-chemists of the early modern era, men obsessed with transmuting base metals into gold, discovering the philosopher's stone, and unlocking the secrets of the universe. Their work was not just mystical, it was intensely physical and extraordinarily dangerous. They routinely handled substances like mercury, arsenic, and sulfur, boiling and distilling them in sealed vessels. The fumes from these operations were known to be toxic, capable of causing dizziness, nausea, and even death. To protect themselves, alchemists developed their own specialized equipment. And when we look at engravings from alchemical texts of the 16th and 17th centuries, we see something startling. The figures depicted are often shown with face coverings featuring long, tubular noses, sometimes connected by hose to ventilation flues in the ceiling. These were not beaks filled with roses. They were practical apparatus designed to draw fresh air from above or to simply create a breathing space away from the immediate chemical fumes. The visual similarity to the plague doctor mask is undeniable. Both feature a human face elongated by a hollow protrusion, a barrier between the breath of the wearer and a dangerous atmosphere. This raises a compelling possibility. Could the design of the plague doctor's mask have been influenced by, or even directly borrowed from, the protective gear of alchemists? The timelines overlap perfectly. The plague doctor's iconic costume crystallized in the 17th century, the same period when alchemical texts with these illustrations were circulating among educated men. A physician like Charles Delorme, moving in learned circles, would almost certainly have been aware of alchemical practices and their equipment. The conceptual leap is a small one. If a long-nosed apparatus could protect a man from the poisonous vapors of arsenic, why could a similar design not protect him from the poisonous vapors of plague? Both were seen as corruptions of the air, one from chemical processes, the other from disease. The plague doctor mask, then, might represent a fascinating crossover of technologies, where a practical tool from the secretive world of the laboratory was adapted for the very public crisis in the streets. It transforms the mask from a purely superstitious or symbolic object into something with a lineage in early experimental science, a piece of practical hazard gear repurposed for the greatest biological hazard of the age. This geographic diversity shatters the single image we hold in our minds. The plague doctor was not a monolithic figure moving identically through every European city. His appearance changed at the border, dictated by local custom, available materials, and the specific fears of each community. In Italy, the Medici della Peste were sometimes depicted with a hauntingly simple tool, a wooden rod topped with a sponge soaked in aromatic vinegar. They would hold this to their faces as they walked, a portable, reusable filter that required no complex leatherwork. Their facial coverings, when shown, often resembled cloth hoods or masks with short, stubby projections, more like a gas mask from the Great War than the long, elegant beak. Cross the Alps into the German states, and the pesteist might be seen in longer coats, but the visual record from broadsheets and municipal notes is inconsistent. Some show facial coverings, others do not emphasize them at all. In France, the Médecins de la Peste following Charles Delorme's ideal might have come closest to the iconic look, but even there, Compliance would have varied wildly between a royal physician's theoretical outfit and what a town in Provence could afford to issue. Meanwhile, in England, descriptions from the Great Plague of 1665 are curiously vague about such a distinctive mask. The famous diarist Samuel Pepys, who chronicled the outbreak in London, makes no mention of encountering doctors who looked like human birds. He writes of fear, of death carts, and of fleeing the city, but not of that unforgettable beak. This silence is telling. If the beaked mask was a common sight in the streets of London, such a vivid and terrifying image would surely have been recorded. Its absence suggests that in many places, the defense was more rudimentary. A simple linen cloth, soaked in vinegar or strong wine, and tied tightly over the nose and mouth, was likely the most widespread and affordable barrier. It was a desperate, homespun solution, a piece of household linen transformed into a last line of defense against the miasma. This patchwork of practices across the continent reveals a crucial truth. The iconic beaked mask was almost certainly a localized innovation. It was the high-tech, specialized gear of certain regions, perhaps in northern Italy or parts of France and Switzerland, where skilled leatherworkers could produce it, and where city councils had the funds to commission such elaborate suits. For every town that could outfit its doctor in waxed leather and a glass-eyed mask, a dozen others probably handed their physician a length of waxed cloth, a hat, and a jar of vinegar. The uniform was not standard issue. It was a luxury item. This geographic diversity does more than just challenge our visual assumptions. It deepens the mystery of origin. If the mask wasn't everywhere, then where, precisely, did it start? And why did this particular local design, from one corner of a plague-ravaged continent, rise above all others to become the universal symbol of the era's despair? Perhaps the most powerful element of the mask was not its ability to filter air, but its ability to filter empathy. Imagine, for a moment, the psychological toll of that job. A plague doctor entered homes where entire families lay dying in their own filth, their bodies racked with pain, their eyes filled with terror. To do this day after day, to remain functional in the face of such overwhelming suffering, required a profound emotional detachment. The mask provided that detachment in a physical, literal form. By hiding the doctor's face, it erased his humanity. The sick did not see the fearful eyes of a young man, the wrinkled brow of an old one, or the involuntary grimace of disgust or pity. They saw only a blank, leather face with the cold, glassy stare of a bird of prey. This dehumanization was a protective mechanism for the wearer. It allowed him to perform his grim duties not as a compassionate neighbor, but as a functionary, a living tool of the civic authority. The mask was a psychological armor, shielding the man inside from the full emotional weight of the horror he witnessed. It created a necessary barrier between his private self and his public, monstrous role. But this transformation had a dual purpose, aimed just as powerfully at the living as it was at the dying. For the terrified populace, the plague doctor was not a caregiver, he was an enforcer. His appearance was a walking piece of theater designed to instill fear and ensure obedience. In an age without police forces or modern public health infrastructure, how did a city compel its citizens to obey brutal quarantine laws? How did it stop people from fleeing infected homes and spreading the disease further? One answer was through a symbol of absolute, terrifying authority. The beaked figure knocking at your door was not coming to help, he was coming to seal you inside. He marked your house with a painted cross, condemning your family to a death sentence of isolation. His inhuman visage made argument or appeal impossible. You could not plead with a face of leather and glass. You could not read sympathy in its expression because it had none. This costume transformed a potentially sympathetic human doctor into an impersonal omen, a harbinger of death that commanded immediate, unquestioning compliance through sheer terror. The design, therefore, served a crucial social function. It was a tool of control in a society unraveling from panic. The long beak and blank eyes broadcast a clear, chilling message. The person beneath this mask is no longer subject to human emotion or persuasion. He is the law, he is the plague, and you will obey. In this light, the mask's medical purpose, whether real or symbolic, becomes almost secondary. Its primary power was theatrical. It staged a nightly drama of authority and doom on the streets of a dying city. The Plague Doctor was both lead actor and stage prop in a performance where the stakes were life and death, and the goal was not a cure, but order amidst the chaos. This reveals the mask's deepest irony. It was crafted to combat an invisible miasma, but its most potent effect was on the visible human mind, chilling the hearts of the healthy and numbing the soul of the man who wore it. While the real Plague Doctor navigated streets of genuine terror, an uncanny double was taking the stage for laughs. In the vibrant, chaotic world of Italian commedia dell'arte, a traveling theater form beloved from the 16th century onward, stock characters ruled. Audiences knew them instantly: the greedy merchant Pantalone, the sly servants Harlequin and Columbina, and the pompous, know-nothing doctor, Ill Daughter. But from the grim reality of the epidemics, a new, specific variant emerged: Il Medico della Pet, the Plague Doctor. This theatrical character did not wear a simple doctor's robe. He was outfitted in an exaggerated version of the protective costume, complete with the long, beaked mask. His role was pure satire. He would strut onto the stage, spouting nonsensical Latin phrases and prescribing outrageous, useless cures, all while maintaining a grotesque air of self-importance. The audience's laughter was a release, a way to mock the very figure that represented their deepest fears and the frequent incompetence of the authorities hired to save them. In this carnivalesque space, the terrifying symbol of death was transformed into a clown, his power deflated by ridicule. Yet this theatrical adoption had a profound and unintended consequence. Commedia troupes traveled widely, their performances seen by thousands across Italy and beyond. For many people, their most vivid, repeated encounter with the image of a beaked doctor would not have been in a plague-stricken alley, but in the town square during a festival. The stage costume, designed for maximum visibility and comic effect, became the definitive image. It standardized the look in the public imagination, freezing it in an exaggerated, theatrical form. The line between the medical reality, which was messy and varied, and the artistic caricature, which was clear and memorable, began to blur irrevocably. What started as a tool for survival and control then became a subject of satire, and through that satire was cemented as an icon. The mask had escaped the infirmary and entered the realm of story, where its legend would only grow stronger, long after the last Plague Doctor had hung up his waxed leather gown. The theater's laughter faded, and for a time, the Plague Doctor retreated into the forgotten corners of history. But a new cultural force was stirring, one that would not only resurrect the figure, but completely reinvent its meaning. The 19th century brought the age of Romanticism, a movement obsessed with the medieval past, the macabre, and the sublime terror of nature. In this atmosphere, the Plague Doctor found a second life, no longer as a satirical clown or a medical functionary, but as a perfect Gothic icon. Writers and painters, hungry for dramatic imagery from a darker age, reached back and plucked the beaked mask from the historical record. They presented it not as a complex symbol of fear and authority, but as a straightforward, haunting fact of medieval life. The nuanced context of Charles de Lorme's recommendations, the biting satire of Paulus Fouest's engraving, and the messy reality of regional variations were all smoothed away. In their place emerged a single, powerful archetype: the Plague Doctor as a solitary, tragic hero, or a sinister omen, wandering through a landscape of pure despair. This romanticized version was often more about evoking a mood than documenting history. It served the Romantic era's craving for emotional intensity, for images that could make a modern reader or viewer feel the overwhelming weight of a bygone catastrophe. The mask became a visual shortcut for the entire medieval experience of plague, a single, unforgettable emblem of death's impersonal grip. This artistic revival was incredibly successful. It cemented the Plague Doctor's image in the popular imagination far more effectively than any dusty medical treatise ever could. But this success came with a hidden cost. By presenting the romanticized version as historical truth, 19th century artists and writers may have accidentally frozen myths in place. The simplified story, the single iconic image, became accepted as the whole story. The very questions we are asking today, about the mask's practical use, its geographic limits, and its true origins are questions that this romantic revival helped to obscure. It gave us a powerful symbol, but in doing so, it may have buried the more complicated, and perhaps more human, reality beneath layers of poetic license and Gothic drama. Romanticism's Gothic brushstrokes set the stage, but our own century has given the plague doctor a jetpack. Today, the beaked mask has escaped the history books entirely, becoming a free-floating icon in the vast universe of pop culture. In blockbuster movies and hit video games, the plague doctor is no longer just a medieval figure. He is a universal shorthand for pestilence, madness, and sinister authority, often unmoored from any specific time period. Video games, in particular, have embraced the aesthetic, transforming the costume into everything from a healer's garb in fantasy realms to the uniform of apocalyptic cult leaders in dystopian futures. The mask's blank, avian stare fits perfectly into digital landscapes designed to unsettle and intimidate. Meanwhile, the steampunk subculture has adopted the look with creative fervor, reimagining the beak with gleaming brass fittings, intricate clockwork gears, and polished leather, blending the historical with the fantastical in a celebration of retro-futuristic style. These modern interpretations are not wrong. They are a testament to the power of the image. They have amplified the mystery and cemented the plague doctor's place in our collective visual library. But this very power creates a potent feedback loop. The more we see this striking figure in games and films, the more we assume it must be an accurate, universal snapshot of history. Pop culture smooths out the wrinkles, presenting a single, terrifying, and coherent archetype where the historical record offers a patchwork of contradictions and regional variations. It exaggerates the mask's prevalence, making it seem like the standard uniform for centuries, rather than a possibly rare and localized innovation. It often simplifies the mask's purpose, presenting it as either a purely superstitious talisman or a perfectly logical filter, missing the complex interplay of medical theory, psychological theater, and social control we have been uncovering. This creative license is not a flaw in storytelling, it is how myths are made and how symbols evolve. But for the historical mystery we are trying to solve, it acts as a thick, attractive layer of varnish over the original, weathered wood. It makes the job of separating compelling fiction from fragmented fact both more difficult and more essential. Our modern fascination, while breathing new life into the icon, has inadvertently built a new kind of mask, one made not of leather and glass, but of pixels and genre tropes, that we must now look past to see the truth. This brings us to a startling and fundamental hole in the mystery. After centuries of stories and countless images, we must ask, where are the masks themselves? Have archaeologists ever pulled a genuine, 17th century plague Dr. Beak from the damp soil of a European city? The sobering answer, after extensive searching through museum collections and excavation records, appears to be no. Not a single one. The reason lies in the very materials that made the mask practical. Leather, wood, glass, and cloth are the sworn enemies of time. In a typical burial environment, leather rots, wood decays, and cloth disintegrates. Unless sealed in a perfectly dry, anoxic tomb, these organic materials simply return to the earth within a few centuries. This creates a profound evidential silence. We have the pictures, we have the texts, but we lack the physical object. This absence forces historians into a difficult position. Without a single surviving specimen to analyze, we cannot know the precise construction methods, the exact dimensions, or the everyday wear and tear on these masks. We cannot test residue inside a beak to confirm it once held rose petals and cloves. Our entire understanding is built on a foundation of descriptions and depictions, which, as we have seen, were often idealized, satirical, or wildly inconsistent. This makes the origin story inherently, unavoidably speculative. We are reconstructing a ghost from its shadow. There have been occasional claims and intriguing possibilities. A few museums in Europe possess what are labeled as plague doctor masks, but upon closer examination, these are often later artifacts, sometimes from the 18th or even 19th century, possibly used in carnival celebrations or created as historical curiosities for collectors. They are echoes of the original, not the voice itself. One of the most cited potential examples resides in a German museum, a simple leather face covering with a short, broad beak. Yet even this piece lacks a definitive, documented provenance linking it directly to plague service. It stands as a powerful symbol, but not as conclusive proof. This evidentiary vacuum is itself a kind of clue. The sheer lack of surviving masks might suggest they were never produced in the vast quantities our popular imagination assumes. If every town had issued them to multiple doctors over 2 centuries of recurring outbreaks, logic suggests at least a few would have survived in attics, chests, or forgotten storerooms. Their complete disappearance hints that the iconic beaked mask may have been a rare, specialized tool rather than standard equipment, used briefly in specific regions before the materials succumbed to time, and the practice faded from memory. We are left, then, to piece together a phantom from fragments of paper and paint, a reminder that sometimes history's most enduring icons are those that leave the faintest physical trace. Faced with this void of physical evidence, a new breed of detective has entered the story. Experimental historians and dedicated craftsmen are not content to merely read about the mask, they are building it. Their mission is to move beyond the paper trail and into the realm of lived experience, to stitch together leather, pack the beak with herbs, and finally ask the body what the mind alone cannot answer. Is the iconic design actually wearable, or is it a satirical exaggeration? Does the aromatic filter work as described, or does it fail in practice? They begin by sourcing materials true to the 17th century. The mask is not molded plastic, but vegetable tanned leather, soaked and carefully shaped over a form, then stitched by hand. The glass for the eye lenses is hand-blown, slightly warped and green-tinged, nothing like modern optical clarity. The gown is heavy waxed canvas, not a lightweight costume replica. And for the beak's fill, they follow the old recipes, mixing dried rose petals, lavender, cloves, mint, and straw, creating a dense, fragrant plug. Then comes the moment of truth, the wearing. The first sensation reported is not of filtered air, but of profound isolation. The world narrows to 2 small, blurry circles of light. Peripheral vision vanishes, sound becomes muffled, echoing slightly inside the leather chamber. The wearer is instantly cut off, a sensation that aligns perfectly with the mask's psychological role of creating detachment. Then, the breathing test. With the beak tightly packed, drawing air requires noticeable effort. It is not impossible, but it is laborious, like breathing through a thick pillow. In the heat and stress of imagined plague work, the instinct to breathe around the mask, to suck air in from the sides where the leather meets the cheeks, would be overwhelming. The herbal scent is present, certainly, a strong, medicinal perfume right under the nose. But does it block the stench of a simulated plague house, say, the odor of rotting meat or strong vinegar placed nearby? In controlled tests, the answer is mixed. Directly in front of the beak, the herbs do provide a dominant scent, but other, fouler odors easily penetrate from the sides, wafting up from below the mask or simply reaching the nose because smell is a complex sense not so easily defeated by a single point of filtration. The most telling finding, however, is often one of logistics. After just an hour of simulated activity, the carefully packed herbs begin to settle. With every movement, every tilt of the head, a fine dust of crushed petals and spices drifts downward. Without a secure chamber or a mesh to hold it in place, the material slowly migrates, potentially leaving empty voids in the beak's tip. These hands-on experiments reveal a critical gap between elegant theory and gritty reality. The mask functions, but not with the clinical efficiency we might imagine. It is hot, restrictive, and visually impairing. The aromatic filter provides a psychological comfort, a powerful olfactory signal of cleanliness to the wearer, but its practical ability to purify miasma appears limited and unstable. This experimental path does not prove the mask was never used, but it strongly suggests that if it was used, its primary power was likely theatrical and psychological. It made the doctor feel protected and made the populace see a figure of terrifying, otherworldly authority. The modern recreation, sweating under its waxed canvas, breathing laboriously through a cloud of cloves, becomes the closest we may ever get to the truth. A testament to an idea brilliant in conception, but deeply flawed in the exhausting, frightening reality of a plague-stricken room. So the mask emerges not from one mind, but from a perfect storm of history. Its iconic form is a hybrid, a convergent evolution of ideas colliding under the pressure of unimaginable fear. There was no single inventor sketching a beaked face and sparking a global phenomenon. Instead, the image coalesced from several powerful streams flowing together. The foundational current was miasma theory, the unshakable belief that corrupt air carried death. This demanded facial protection, a basic barrier between the healer's breath and the poisoned atmosphere. That need met the capabilities of the time, the skilled hands of leatherworkers who could mold and stitch a durable, form-fitting face guard, and glassmakers who could produce simple lenses. Into this practical mix seeped other influences. The long, tubular breathing apparatus seen in alchemical laboratories offered a prototype for distancing a man from fumes. The exaggerated masks of the Commedia dell'arte stage provided a template for transforming a human into a symbol, and hovering over it all was a deep, perhaps subconscious, cultural memory, the ancient power of the bird mask as a spiritual interface, a way for a human to put on another identity when confronting the invisible. The plague doctor's costume was a desperate assembly of every tool a pre-scientific society could muster: medical theory, craft, theater, and ritual, all stitched into a single, terrifying suit. It was a piece of psychological armor as much as physical protection. The waxed leather kept fluids out, but the blank, avian face kept human connection out. It served the terrified populace by presenting an authority figure so inhuman it commanded instant obedience. It served the doomed patient by offering a final, ritualized encounter with something beyond a frightened neighbor. And it served the wearer by allowing him to perform an impossible job without breaking under the weight of shared humanity. The beak was the focal point of this convergence. Whether it ever truly functioned as an effective herbal filter is almost beside the point. Its power lay in its symbolism. It was a grotesque answer to a grotesque problem, a physical manifestation of the era's attempt to grapple with forces it could not see, understand, or control. The mystery of its origin endures precisely because it was not born in a single moment of genius, but woven slowly from the fraying fabric of a society in collapse. That leather beak, born from miasma and medieval dread, did not vanish with the last plague pit. It simply waited in the shadows of our collective memory, ready to step back into the light when the air once again felt dangerous. In the spring of 2020, as a novel coronavirus swept the globe, the ghost of the plague doctor made an unexpected, digital return. It appeared not in hospitals, but on social media feeds, transformed into a viral meme. People photoshopped the beaked figure into empty supermarket aisles, standing 6 feet apart in line, or holding a modern bottle of hand sanitizer. The image became a darkly humorous shorthand for the surreal, frightening new reality of lockdowns, masks, and social distancing. It was a joke, but one tinged with profound recognition. Centuries later, we instinctively reached for the same icon to express a shared sense of upheaval. This was more than just an internet trend, it was a historical echo. The parallels were unnerving. Once again, we were advised to cover our faces as a barrier against an invisible threat. Once again, we practiced isolation, creating physical distance to halt an unseen contagion. Once again, certain professions, from healthcare workers to delivery drivers, became our societal lifelines, navigating a hazardous world on our behalf. The plague doctor meme worked because it captured the eerie familiarity of it all. The feeling that despite our advanced technology, we were replaying a very old, very human script. The costume, with its inherent themes of separation and protection, resonated deeply in a world suddenly full of masked faces and empty public spaces. It served as a morbid mirror, reflecting our own pandemic anxieties back at us through the glass lenses of history. Why does this particular image hold such enduring power? Its longevity lies in its perfect encapsulation of two timeless truths about epidemics. First, it visualizes our primal fear of disease itself, of the invisible killer that can strike anyone, anywhere. The mask is a literal barrier against that fear. But second, and perhaps more profoundly, It symbolizes the profound alienation that pandemic response demands. The plague doctor's costume is the ultimate social distancing gear. It erases the individual, replacing human expression with a uniform of impersonal authority and isolation. It represents the painful but necessary trade-off between community and survival, the moment we must wall ourselves off from each other to protect each other. In 2020, we all, in a sense, became a version of the plague doctor. Our cloth face coverings and our stay-at-home orders were a gentler, more compassionate iteration of the same principle. We were all behind a mask, doing our part to purify the shared air. The haunting figure from the past endures because it is not merely a relic, it is a prototype. It is the stark, original blueprint for how a society armors itself, both physically and psychologically, against the storm of a pandemic. It reminds us that our modern responses, for all their science, are still built upon that ancient, instinctual foundation. The human need to create a barrier, to become something slightly less human, in order to persevere. The mask's journey leaves us not with a neat conclusion, but with a trail of fascinating, unanswered questions. We have traced the threads of miasma theory, medical practice, and cultural symbolism, yet the precise moment of creation remains frustratingly out of focus. Who was the first artisan to hold a piece of leather and think, "This will be the face of the plague"? Was it a single, brilliant leatherworker in Venice or Lyon, commissioned by a desperate city council? Or did the design emerge simultaneously in several workshops, a convergent solution to a common, terrifying problem? We may never know their name. Similarly, was there a specific, catastrophic outbreak that served as the catalyst? Did the Great Plague of Milan in 1630, or the horrific outbreak in Naples in 1656, create such a desperate need for a visible, authoritative symbol that the beaked mask was formally codified as official gear? The historical record offers tantalizing hints but refuses to give a definitive answer. These are not just academic puzzles. They are human stories waiting to be recovered from the silence of the archives. This mystery is why the work continues today. A dedicated community of historians, art sleuths, and material culture experts are still on the case. They are not digging in plague pits, but rather scouring through centuries of municipal records, personal diaries, and estate inventories. They are examining every piece of period art with a magnifying glass, looking not just at the central figure, but at the backgrounds, searching for a glimpse of a mask hanging on a hook or stored in a chest. Their holy grail is a smoking gun document, perhaps a detailed invoice from a leatherworker to a city health board, itemizing the cost for one long beaked mask with glass eyes. Or maybe it will be a previously overlooked sketch in a doctor's personal notebook, a rough design doodled in the margin next to notes on symptoms. Another team focuses on the material evidence, using advanced techniques to analyze the few surviving masks in museum collections, hoping to date the leather or identify organic residues within the beak with a precision never before possible. Each tiny discovery, a new reference in a ledger, a clearer reading of a faded manuscript, adds another piece to a puzzle we may never fully complete. This ongoing research reminds us that history is not a closed book, but a living conversation. The plague doctor's mask, for all its iconic fame, is still whispering its secrets, challenging us to look closer, to ask better questions, and to remember that behind every symbol of faceless terror, there was once a human hand that shaped it. Perhaps the greatest clue to the mask's origin lies in the very fact that we are still searching for it. The plague doctor's visage possesses a unique kind of immortality, not because it was perfectly effective, but because it is perfectly strange. Its power is a threefold alchemy of design, concept, and ambiguity. Visually, it is an arresting silhouette, a shape that instantly communicates otherness and dread. It bypasses rational thought and taps directly into a primal part of our brain that recognizes a predator's profile. Conceptually, it marries two deeply human realms, the cold rationality of medicine with the visceral terror of the horror genre. It is a tool born from science, as they understood it, that looks like a nightmare. This collision makes it endlessly fascinating, but the true engine of its endurance is the historical vacuum at its core. We have the image, but we lack the certificate of birth. This ambiguity is not a flaw in the historical record. It is the feature that keeps the story alive. A clear, documented origin story, filed in a city archive, would satisfy our curiosity and then allow the symbol to rest. But a mystery invites participation. The gaps in the record are spaces for our imagination to fill. Was it a medical device, a theatrical prop, a psychological weapon? The lack of a single, definitive answer means it can be all these things at once. It becomes a blank slate, or rather, a leather-clad slate, upon which every generation can project its own anxieties about disease, authority, and the unknown. In the 18th century, it was a Gothic relic. In the 19th, a romantic symbol of tragic history. In the 20th, a staple of horror films. In the 21st, a viral meme for a new pandemic. The mask's meaning is not fixed, it is fluid, evolving with our collective fears. This malleability is the secret of its longevity. It is a perfect vessel for storytelling precisely because its own story is unfinished. The unanswered questions, the ghost in the historical machine, are what compel historians to keep digging and artists to keep reimagining. The mystery is more compelling than any solution could ever be, because as long as the question remains, the icon continues to breathe. From the miasma-choked streets of the Black Death to the satirical stages of Commedia dell'arte, the Plague Doctor's mask has traveled a long and twisted road. It is a journey that reveals less about a single moment of invention and more about the enduring human need to create symbols in the face of the unimaginable. We have no patent, no inventor's signature, only fragments, a royal physician's recommendation, an artist's mocking engraving, and a haunting absence of physical evidence. This very lack of a clear origin is its own kind of truth. History, especially the history of something born from terror, is rarely a clean lineage. It is a palimpsest, a document written over time, where hard facts blend with desperate adaptations and later myths. The mask we recognize today is the product of this layering, a composite of medical theory, skilled craftsmanship, social control, and artistic exaggeration. It was never just one thing. For the man who wore it, it was a psychological shield and a desperate filter. For the town that hired him, it was a tool of authority and a piece of civic theater. For the artists who followed, it became a Gothic icon and a satirical punchline. And for us, centuries later, it is a viral meme and a universal shorthand for pandemic dread. So, what is the origin of the Plague Doctor mask? The most honest answer is that it has no single origin. It is a shape that emerged from the collision of crisis and culture, a leather and glass idea that proved more powerful than any disease. It endures not because it worked, but because it means. It is a dark mirror, reflecting our timeless, collective struggle against the invisible terrors that move through the air and through the centuries. When you see that blank, beaked face now, you are not looking at a medieval doctor. You are looking at the ghost of a society's fear, and perhaps a glimpse of our own.